They told me the 404th was a desk job, supply chain logistics, safe. A posting so far behind the lines that the loudest thing I'd hear all day would be a forklift backing up. I signed the transfer chit before the ink on the offer had a chance to dry, because 2 years of eating shrapnel on the Orion front had taught me that when the universe offers you a word like safe, you don't ask questions. You sign. My name is Caleb Miller. I was 26 years old, a certified master technician with the Coalition Expeditionary Force, and by the time that transfer order came through, I had spent 731 days tightening bolts on artillery pieces while the local insurgency did its level best to introduce me to an early grave. I had learned to sleep through incoming fire. I had learned to eat cold rations in a flooded trench without gagging. I had learned that command didn't care about any of that, as long as the guns kept firing. What I hadn't learned, what nobody had bothered to teach me, was that the universe has a sense of humor, and that sense of humor was about to be aimed directly at me. The storm hit the moment I stepped off the transport. Heavy rain, the acidic kind that ate through cheap fabric if you stood in it too long, lashed against my visor and turned the flickering neon signage of Forward Operating Base Delta into long orange smears. I clutched my data pad to my chest, shielding it from the downpour, and slogged through mud that sucked at my boots like it was trying to keep me. 2 years. 2 years of tightening bolts while getting shelled myself. And now, finally, my transfer to the 404th Logistics and Auxiliary had gone through. Logistics meant walls. It meant heating. It meant sleeping with both eyes closed for the first time since I'd shipped out. My neural implant pinged, overlaying a green navigational arrow across my vision. It pointed toward a massive reinforced bunker at the edge of the perimeter. Sector 7. That struck me as odd. Sector 7 was reserved for heavy infantry, specifically for the Coalition's allied alien shock troops who needed reinforced flooring and specialized atmospheric scrubbers that human barracks didn't carry. I paused at the edge of the mud flat, wiping grime from my faceplate, my joints aching with the deep, grinding fatigue of 2 years spent never fully resting. I decided I didn't care. If the 404th shared a wall with a nuclear reactor, that was fine, as long as there was a cot with my name on it. I punched the access code into the keypad outside the bunker. The heavy steel doors hissed and slid apart with a groan that vibrated through the soles of my boots. Heat rolled out to meet me, not the stale, recycled air of a human barracks, but something thick and humid, heavy with the smell of ozone, gun oil, and something distinctly feral underneath it all, like rain hissing off a hot stone. I stepped inside. The door thudded shut behind me, swallowing the storm whole. I unlatched my helmet and let it drop to my side, blinking against the sudden glare of industrial lighting. 80 conversations stopped at once. I froze in the doorway. The room was cavernous, lined with bunks that looked more like reinforced steel cages than beds. Weapons were laid out in various states of disassembly across iron worktables. Plasma casters the size of my torso, kinetic hammers that could snap a human spine from the recoil alone. But it wasn't the weapons that made the blood drain out of my face. It was the soldiers holding them. They averaged 7 feet in height. Slate gray skin patterned with darker striations that shifted subtly when their heavy muscles flexed. Minimalist combat fatigues that did absolutely nothing to disguise physiques built for high-gravity warfare. 4-fingered hands tipped with blunt, practical claws rested on half-cleaned weapons, and every single one of those hands had gone still. Every single pair of eyes, luminous, unblinking, had turned to lock onto me. My implant, calibrated to translate their vocalizations and pheromone signatures into human cultural equivalents, began tagging the soldiers in my field of view with soft blue names, a psychological comfort feature some coalition psychologist had dreamed up to make giant alien shock troops less terrifying to human grunts. It was not working. A soldier near the closest table, tagged Roxy by my HUD, slowly lowered the bolt carrier group she'd been cleaning. Her eyes were a stark, luminous amber, and there was a jagged scar running down the left side of her jaw. She didn't blink. None of them did. I managed. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and forced my spine straight. I had survived the trench fighting at Outpost Charlie. I was not going to let a room full of heavy infantry intimidate me. I'm looking for the 404th's duty officer. A low rumble vibrated through the floorboards, a collective murmur of deep, chest-rattling clicks and low hums that spread through the barracks like water finding cracks in stone. From the back of the room, a figure rose. She was taller than the rest, pushing 7'3", with heavy pauldron armor still strapped across her shoulders. My HUD tagged her Harper, with a rank insignia roughly equivalent to a human major. She walked down the central aisle. The other soldiers parted for her with a rigid, immediate deference that sent a chill straight down my spine. She stopped 3 feet in front of me, close enough that I had to crane my neck to hold her eyes, and looked me over. Muddy armor, grease-stained hands, exhausted face. "You are in the wrong sector, human," she said. The translator earpiece rendered her deep, resonant growl into a harsh, clipped female voice. "This is a frontline assault barracks. My orders say 404th Logistics and Auxiliary." I held up the data pad, my hand shaking slightly. I clamped it down. Caleb Miller, reassigned as Chief Mechanic and Quartermaster Auxiliary. Harper didn't take the pad. She leaned in, and the smell of ozone and sweat became overpowering. The 404th is a Chiari unit. We are an all-female Blood Cadre. We do not have human mechanics, and we certainly do not take male non-combatants. I stared at her. Whatever exhaustion had been sitting in my bones evaporated, replaced by a cold spike of pure panic. I looked past her at the 80 massive, heavily armed women watching my every move. The silence was absolute. "Clerical error," I muttered, looking back down at the pad. "Command must have screwed up the unit designation. I'll head back to the admin tent, get it sorted out." I took a step backward, reaching for the door panel. A heavy gray hand clamped onto my shoulder. It felt like being caught in a vice made of warm iron. I stopped dead. "No," Harper said, her voice dropping an octave. "The storm is a Category 4 hazard. Administration is locked down until morning. You are not leaving." Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Harper's grip on my shoulder didn't tighten, but the implication was perfectly clear. I was rooted to this spot until she decided otherwise. I looked up into her amber eyes, searching for a trace of malice and finding instead only a fierce, predatory curiosity. "I can sleep in the corridor," I offered, my voice betraying a hint of desperation. "I've slept in worse. Really, it's fine." Harper released my shoulder and crossed her arms, the metal plates of her armor clanking together. "Our corridors are unheated. Ambient temperature will drop below your species' survival threshold within 2 hours. You will remain in the barracks." She turned her head, projecting her voice across the room. "Roxy, clear a bottom rack." The scarred soldier nodded sharply and crossed to a bunk near the center of the room. She lifted a duffel bag that would have taken 2 human men to carry and tossed it onto the top rack as though it weighed nothing, then patted the thin, rigid mattress below and looked at me. Her lips parted, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp for comfort. "Come on, little human," she called, and the translator rendered her tone as a rough, mocking purr. "It won't bite." A ripple of laughter spread through the barracks, a sound like diesel engines idling. I swallowed hard, clutched my helmet, and walked down the aisle, every step feeling like I was wading through deep water. The Chiari didn't glance away when I caught them looking. They tracked me the way apex predators track a wounded animal stumbling into their den. I reached the bunk. It was wide enough for 2 of me, and the mattress felt like solid concrete. I set my helmet down and unbuckled my utility harness, letting it drop with a metallic clatter. I kept my sidearm holstered, a stupid, instinctual comfort. A standard plasma pistol wouldn't even scratch a Chiari's dermal layer, let alone stop one that was angry, but the weight against my leg made me feel marginally less naked. Roxy leaned against the steel bunk frame, uncomfortably close, arms crossed over a chest built like an armored bulkhead. "Caleb," she said, testing the shape of my name in her mouth. "A soft sound. You look fragile, Caleb." "How did you survive the trenches?" "Kept my head down," I said honestly, staring straight ahead, and I fixed the guns that kept the insurgency from overrunning the wire. A soldier from the adjacent bunk leaned over. My HUD tagged her Quinn, leaner than Roxy, with intricate dark blue tattoos spiraling up her neck. "You fixed the heavy weapons? Human hands are so small." She reached out, thick fingers hovering inches from my face. I flinched, leaning back, and Quinn laughed, a deep, resonant sound. "Nervous. Males of our species do not go to war," she said. They remain on the homeworld. They weave. They study. They raise the young. They break if you handle them too roughly. I don't weave, I said, a spark of defensive anger cutting through the fear, and I don't break that easily. Harper's silhouette appeared at the end of the aisle. Conversation died instantly. Enough. The human needs rest. We deploy at 0600. She looked at me, expression unreadable. You will sleep. Tomorrow I will drag you to administration myself and fix this error. Until then, you are under my protection. If any of my cadre touch you inappropriately, you tell me. Do you understand? Understood, Major, I said, using her translated rank. She gave a slow, deliberate nod and turned toward her private quarters. The steel door slid shut behind her. The main lights dimmed from harsh white to a low tactical red, casting long, demonic shadows across the concrete walls. Around me, the Chiari began settling into their racks, heavy armor unlatching and dropping to the floor with a rhythm of dull, metallic thuds. I swung my legs up onto the mattress and lay back, not bothering to remove my boots, staring up at the metal springs of the bunk above me. My heart was still hammering. "Hey, Caleb," Roxy's voice from above. "Yeah," I whispered back. "You really fixed the heavy plasma casters?" "Yes," a pause. The mattress above me groaned as she shifted her weight. "My primary cannon has been overheating after 4 cycles. The local armorers couldn't find the fault. It's the coolant injection valve," I said, the mechanical knowledge flowing out of me automatically. Safe ground, something I understood. Sand on this planet gets past the primary filters, scores the valve lining. You need to strip it, flush it with solvent, and replace the O-rings with the high-temp variant. Standard issue melts. Silence hung in the red-lit air. "High-temp variants," Roxy repeated softly. "Tomorrow, before Harper drags you to administration, you will fix it for me." It wasn't a request. "Sure," I said to the ceiling. "I'll fix it." I closed my eyes, listening to the deep, rhythmic breathing of 80 alien giants settling into rest and thought, with the specific, sinking dread of a man who has just realized his own transfer papers might be the death of him, that this clerical error was going to be a lot harder to undo than just asking for a new piece of paper. Morning arrived not with a sunrise, but with the ear-splitting shriek of a klaxon. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding, hand dropping instinctively toward an empty holster before I remembered I'd taken it off. Red tactical lighting flipped to blinding fluorescent white. The bunker came alive around me. The Chiari didn't wake groggy. They transitioned from rest to absolute readiness in seconds. Boots hit concrete. Armor plates clattered. The smell of morning rations, some kind of high-protein meat paste, filled the humid air. I sat up, my spine cracking in 3 places. The concrete-hard mattress had done me no favors. Before I could rub the sleep from my eyes, a massive shadow fell across my bunk. Roxy stood there, already half-armored, holding the primary assembly of a Mark V heavy plasma caster in one hand like it was a toy. A weapon that fully assembled weighed close to 90 pounds. "You promised," she said. The translator rendered it flat, expectant. Right, the coolant valve. I blinked myself the rest of the way awake. "Give me 5 minutes. I deploy in 40. "Then you'd better put it on the table and find me some solvent," I muttered, sliding out of the bunk. She grunted, a low clicking sound in her throat, but carried the weapon to the nearest iron workbench. I grabbed my utility belt and followed. Nearby Chiari paused their morning prep to watch. I ignored them and unspooled my tool roll, pulling out a magnetic driver. The Mark V was a standard coalition heavy weapon, but built for Chiari hands. Wide access ports, thick retaining pins. I popped the primary housing open. The smell of burnt carbon and fried electronics hit me. I dug my fingers into the receiver, maneuvering past the heat sinks. "See this?" I asked, pointing a grease-stained finger into the guts of the gun. Roxy leaned over my shoulder, radiating heat like a furnace. "Your local armorers never cleaned the primary baffle. The sand scored the seal." I pulled out needle-nose pliers. This was where human hands had the advantage, small enough to bypass the secondary housing entirely. I reached into the narrow chamber, clamped onto the ruined O-ring, and twisted. It popped free, a melted circle of useless black rubber. I tossed it onto the table. "Got any high-temp seals in the armory?" Roxy dug through a thigh pouch and tossed a small plastic case onto the bench. I snapped it open, found the blue-rimmed silicone ring and seated it into the valve assembly, then tightened down the injection port and wiped away the excess carbon with a rag. Done. It won't overheat, but you need to stop dragging the muzzle through the dirt when you vault trenches. A murmur rippled through the gathered soldiers. Roxy picked up the weapon and racked the charging handle. A satisfying, heavy clack of metal seating perfectly into place. A green light flared on the casing. She looked at the gun, then down at me, amber eyes narrowing. "Human mechanics are efficient," she said. "You will survive." Before I could ask what exactly she meant by that, Harper's voice boomed across the barracks. "Miller, gear up." She strode toward me, armor fully assembled, scarred from countless drops, a data pad in one hand. "We are going to administration. I want you out of my barracks before my cadre gets too accustomed to having a pet." I didn't argue. The storm had passed, leaving FOB Delta drowning in thick yellow mud beneath a bruised purple sky. I walked a pace behind Harper, jogging every few steps to match her long, punishing stride. Coalition grunts, mostly human, stopped and stared as we passed. A human trailing a Chiari major like a lost puppy was not a common sight on this base. The administration bunker was a sterile, heavily fortified dome near the center of the base, smelling of stale coffee and burnt ozone. A human clerk sat behind thick plexiglass, tagged by my HUD as Jenkins, exhausted, with bags under his eyes deep enough to carry ammunition. "Major Harper?" Jenkins said through the intercom, unbothered. Clerks were never intimidated. They possessed the ultimate power, bureaucratic apathy. "What can I do for the 404th? "You assigned a human male to my Blood Cadre," Harper said. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. Her voice rattled the plexiglass. "Fix it. Reassign him." Jenkins sighed and tapped away at a holographic keyboard. Name and serial. "Caleb Miller, 8842199, I said, stepping up beside her. "I'm supposed to be logistics and auxiliary. Standard supply depot." He kept typing. A minute passed, then 2. He frowned, leaning closer to his screen. "Miller. Yeah, I see it. Transfer approved by Sector Command. Assigned to 404th Auxiliary." "The 404th does not have a human auxiliary," Harper stated, cold as vacuum. "They do now," Jenkins replied, not looking up. "Command restructured the support doctrines last week. They're attaching embedded mechanics directly to heavy infantry squads to reduce equipment downtime. You people break a lot of guns, Major. Command got tired of paying for replacements." "This is unacceptable." Harper slammed a fist against the counter. The metal buckled slightly. "He will die on the first drop." "Take it up with Sector Command," Jenkins said, entirely unfazed by the dented steel. "I can submit an appeal. 6 to 8 weeks to process. Until then, he's your mechanic." I stared at him, my stomach dropping into my boots. 6 to 8 weeks. I wouldn't last 6 days embedded with a frontline assault unit. "Cancel the transfer," I pleaded. "Send me back to Outpost, Charlie. Please." Jenkins looked at me with dead eyes. "Systems locked, Miller. You belong to the 404th now, next in line." Harper didn't say a word on the walk back to Sector 7. Her silence was heavier than the gravity on this miserable rock. I trudged behind her, mind spinning through numbers that all pointed to the same conclusion. The life expectancy of a frontline mechanic embedded with heavy infantry was measured in hours, not weeks. When we entered the barracks, the atmosphere had shifted. The women of the 404th were fully geared, checking ammo loads, calibrating HUDs, applying dark, oily war paint to slate gray skin. Harper stopped at the head of the aisle and turned to face me. "You are a liability," she said bluntly, the translator clipping her words sharp as glass. "My cadre fights in the vanguard. We breach the line so the soft troops can follow. We do not babysit." "I don't need a babysitter." I lied, and my hands were shaking. I balled them into fists to hide it. "I just need a workstation and broken gear. I can keep your weapons firing." Harper's amber eyes flicked to my hands, then to my face. "Roxy told me what you did with her plasma caster. She said your small hands are useful." "I'm a certified master technician," I said, clinging to the only leverage I had. "I know Chiari tech. I know coalition tech. If I stay in the rear with the supply train, I won't get in your way." "The 404th has no rear," Harper replied. "We drop together. We fight together." She turned to face the room, and her voice rose to a roar that cut through the bunker like a physical shockwave. 80 soldiers snapped to attention. "Command has chained this human to our cadre," she announced, pointing a massive finger at me. "He is frail. He is slow. But he possesses mechanical utility. He is our embedded asset. You will treat him as such. If he falls behind, you leave him. If he breaks, we discard him. But while he breathes, he maintains the armory." She looked at Roxy. "He is your shadow. Keep him alive long enough to fix the secondary thermal scopes on Squad 3's rifles." Roxy grinned, a terrifying expression. "Understood, Major." "Come here, little mechanic." I walked over. My legs felt like lead. She grabbed the shoulder webbing of my harness and practically lifted me off the ground, hauling me toward the back of the bunker where the spare parts were caged. "We drop in 20 minutes, she said, shoving a crate of thermal optics into my chest. It weighed a ton. I staggered but kept my grip. Squad 3's scopes are misaligned. They cannot target through the smoke. Fix them. I didn't argue. I didn't have time to panic. The mechanical instinct took over. I dropped the crate onto a workbench, ripped it open, and lost myself in the delicate work of realigning laser gyros for 19 straight minutes, the world narrowing down to tiny intricate servos and nothing else. This was my war, and for a few precious minutes, it was easier than being afraid. Time. Harper's voice boomed. I slammed the casing shut on the last optic and tossed it to Quinn, who caught it effortlessly and snapped it onto her rifle rail. A green targeting laser lanced across the room, perfectly straight. She tapped her chest plate twice, a Chiari gesture of respect. Efficient. The base siren shrieked a heartbeat later. Not the morning alarm, the frantic, oscillating wail of incoming fire. The ground shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. A muffled explosion rattled my teeth, followed by 3 more in rapid succession. The insurgency wasn't waiting for us to drop on them. They were hitting FOB Delta directly. "Incoming artillery," Harper bellowed, slapping her helmet on. "Breach protocols. Perimeter compromised. 404th, move out." The barracks doors hissed open and the Chiari poured out into the mud like a gray avalanche. I stood frozen at the workbench, tools still in my hands, the reality of my situation finally landing on me full force. I wasn't going to a supply depot. I was going to a firefight. A heavy hand grabbed the back of my collar. Roxy jerked me forward, nearly snapping my neck. "Move, human," she snarled, hauling me toward the door. "You are my shadow now. Do not fall behind." We hit the exterior mud just as a mortar shell impacted 50 yards away. The shockwave threw me off my feet, but Roxy didn't let go. She dragged me upright, her massive plasma caster already tracking targets through the toxic fog. Tracers lit up the bruised sky. The roar of kinetic hammers and plasma fire drowned out the sirens. I scrambled for my sidearm, a pathetic gesture against the sheer volume of violence erupting around us. Roxy stepped in front of me, using her armored bulk to shield me from a spray of shrapnel that pinged off her plates like hail. "Stay low," she roared, firing a blinding burst of blue plasma into the smoke. "And if my gun jams, you fix it." I hit the mud, clutching my tool roll like a lifeline. I was terrified. I was outmatched. But as I watched 80 Chiari women form a flawless, unbreakable wall of violence around my position, a strange, cynical thought crossed my mind. Sector Command had definitely screwed me, but if I had to be stuck in a war zone, at least I was stuck with the biggest, meanest monsters on the battlefield. I just had to make sure their guns didn't break. Dirt rained down in clumps the size of my fist. The trench wall shook with the kinetic force of the artillery barrage tearing apart the staging ground behind us. I pressed my face into the mud, hands clamped over my ears, though it barely helped. The noise was a physical entity, a crushing weight vibrating through my ribs. FOB Delta was burning. The local insurgents, a fanatic species of multi-limbed scavengers the Coalition designated as Rippers, had bypassed the outer sensor grid and were swarming the wire. I peeked over my forearms. Through the toxic yellow smoke, I saw the 404th holding the line, standing shoulder to shoulder in the knee-deep muck, a living wall of gray armor firing in perfect synchronization. Roxy was 5 feet to my left, bracing her Mark V against her hip, laughing between every burst, a deep, chest-rattling sound cutting through the deafening roar. Then a heavy projectile shrieked in and slammed into the barricade directly in front of her. The explosion threw jagged concrete and shrapnel outward. Roxy stumbled back, her armor sparking, and her plasma caster let out a horrific grinding screech. The blue glow in the barrel flickered and died. She racked the charging handle. It wouldn't budge. "Jammed!" she roared, dropping to one knee, pulling a heavy combat blade from her thigh sheath as two rippers breached the wire and charged. I didn't think. If I'd thought about it, I would have stayed in the mud. Survival instinct told me to play dead, but mechanical instinct, and the cold realization that if Roxy died, I was next, dragged me to my feet. I scrambled through the muck and slid into the crater beside her just as she lunged forward, catching the first ripper by its mandibles and driving her blade up into its thorax. Acidic blood sprayed across her visor. The second ripper vaulted over its dead companion, claws extending. I grabbed the heavy caster from where she'd dropped it, hauling it onto my lap, fingers slipping on blood and grime. "Cover me!" I screamed. Roxy didn't answer with words. She threw herself between me and the incoming horde, becoming a blur of gray armor and steel, buying me the seconds I needed. I wiped the mud off the receiver. Shrapnel had dented the secondary housing, pinning the cooling fins against the magnetic rail assembly, a smart failsafe that had triggered to prevent a catastrophic meltdown, and which right now meant we were going to die. I fumbled for my tool roll, dropped my first pry bar into the puddle beneath me, cursed, and grabbed a heavy-duty magnetic driver instead. I jammed the flathead into the crevice between the dented plating and the cooling fins. "Hold on," I yelled, though she couldn't hear me over the slaughter. I put my entire body weight against the driver, leveraging myself against the stubborn alien metal. My shoulders screamed. The metal groaned. I bit down on my lip, tasting copper, and pushed harder. With a harsh snap, the dented housing popped outward. Hot steam hissed from the vents, scalding my knuckles. I ignored the burn, reached in with my pliers, bypassed the bent retaining clip, and manually reset the magnetic rail alignment. The weapon shuddered in my lap. The green indicator light flared back to life, and a low, angry hum began building through the chassis. I slapped the casing shut. "Roxy!" She was grappling with a ripper, holding its snapping jaws inches from her faceplate. I shoved the heavy caster up toward her. She didn't even look. Her lower left hand snapped out, catching the weapon by the grip. In one fluid motion, she kicked the alien back, leveled the gun one-handed, and fired. A point-blank burst of plasma evaporated the Ripper's upper torso. The concussion knocked me flat onto my back. Roxy stood over me, panting, the enemy's dark blood smoking as it dripped off her armor. She looked down at the gun, then down at me lying in the mud. The combat madness in her amber eyes receded just a fraction, replaced by something sharper. Appraisal. She reached down, grabbed my tactical webbing, and hauled me back to my feet like a child. "Keep behind me, little mechanic," she growled, slamming a fresh thermal cell into her weapon. "You are proving expensive to replace." I grabbed my driver, spat a mouthful of gritty mud onto the ground, and nodded. For the next 3 hours, every time a gun jammed, a sight misaligned, or a kinetic hammer lost charge, a massive hand would drag me through the mud to fix it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was keeping the monsters fed. Smoke clung to the ceiling of Sector 7 like a bruised sky. The base sirens had finally stopped, replaced by the hollow, exhausting silence that always follows a firefight. Outside, the rain had returned, washing the acidic blood and yellow mud off the barricades. I sat on the floor near the rear workbench, my back against a steel pillar, unable to feel my legs. My hands were stained black with carbon and synthetic grease. I'd lost a patch of skin on my left forearm to a plasma burn, and my head pounded with a relentless rhythmic ache. I pulled a dirty rag from my pocket and began wiping down my magnetic driver, too tired to sleep, adrenaline crashing and leaving behind a cold, hollow shell of nervous energy. Footsteps approached, heavy, deliberate. I looked up. Major Harper stood over me, one of her pauldrons entirely sheared off, dried alien blood caked along her left leg. "Miller," she said. I tried to stand, military training kicking in, but my knees refused to lock. I managed halfway before sliding back down against the pillar. "Major." Harper didn't reprimand me. She unclipped a metal canteen from her belt and tossed it to me. I caught it clumsily. Heavy, filled with cold, heavily mineralized water. "Drink," she ordered. I unscrewed the cap and took a long swig. It tasted like tin and sulfur, and it was the best thing I had ever swallowed. "We lost 0 personnel today," Harper stated, crossing her arms. The translator clipped her words, but there was a strange cadence beneath it, a shift in tone I hadn't heard from her before. 3 wounded, minor injuries. Squad 2 repelled a breach on the eastern wire because their kinetic drivers did not stall in the muck. "Grease the impact seals," I mumbled, wiping my mouth. "Told them to stop dragging the hammers through the dirt." Harper tilted her head. "Roxy reported that you repaired her primary weapon under direct enemy fire. She stated you removed an armor obstruction using manual leverage." "It was just a dented housing," I said, looking down at my burnt knuckles. "A basic field repair no Chiari mechanic would attempt while the plasma core was primed. They would consider the risk of immolation too high. They would fall back." She corrected herself. "You did not fall back." "I didn't have anywhere to go," I answered honestly. "If I ran, I'd get shot. If I didn't fix the gun, Roxy would get overrun, and then I'd get shot. Fixing the gun was the only option that didn't end with me dead." Harper stared at me for a long moment. The harsh red tactical lighting caught the jagged scars along her neck. Finally, she gave a slow, deep nod. It wasn't a dismissal. It was an acknowledgement. "Rest, Caleb Miller," she said, using my full name for the first time. "You have earned your bunk." She turned and walked toward her private quarters. I let my head fall back against the pillar and closed my eyes, wanting 5 minutes of silence where I didn't have to look at broken metal or alien giants. A heavy thud beside me made my eyes snap back open. Roxy had dropped a battered kinetic hammer onto the workbench. She pulled up a steel stool and sat down, crowding my personal space, smelling heavily of ozone and sweat. "The recoil dampener is misaligned," she said, amber eyes locking onto mine. It wasn't a question. I sighed, reaching for my tool roll. "Give me 10 minutes. Before I could pop the primary latches, another shadow fell over the bench. Quinn dropped 2 cracked thermal scopes onto the metal table. "We drop again tomorrow. I need them functional." Then another soldier. HUD tagged Chloe, dropped a jammed sidearm onto the pile. Then another. Then 2 more. I froze, hands hovering over the tools, as a dozen massive, heavily armed Chiari warriors formed a semicircle around my workbench. They weren't intimidating me. They weren't mocking me. The predatory, mocking stares from yesterday were gone, replaced by an intense, overwhelming expectation. They looked at me the way human grunts looked at the medevac choppers. I wasn't just a fragile, misplaced human male anymore. I was their lifeline. I was the one who kept their fangs sharp. "Wait," I said, holding up my hands as another soldier tried to drop an armor plate onto the overflowing bench. "Line up one at a time. I only have 2 hands." The Chiari stopped, looked at each other, and slowly formed a rigid, orderly line. Roxy remained seated beside me, glaring at the others like she dared them to rush the queue. She'd claimed her spot, and in the unspoken hierarchy of the 404th, the rest of them respected it. I picked up my driver and looked at the mountain of broken, scorched, jammed weaponry piled on my desk. I was exhausted. I was bleeding. I was stuck on the most dangerous planet in the sector with a blood cadre of giant, aggressive matriarchs. But as I popped the seal on Roxy's kinetic hammer and got to work, a cynical smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Command had tried to throw me away. Instead, they had accidentally made me the most valuable man in the battalion. Time in Sector 7 didn't pass in days or weeks. It passed in repair tickets, artillery barrages, and empty thermal cells. By my 3rd week with the 404th, the bureaucratic countdown of 6 to 8 weeks had dissolved into a meaningless joke. Jenkins hadn't sent a single update regarding my transfer. I'd stopped asking. The war didn't care about paperwork, and neither did the mud. My corner of the barracks had evolved. It was no longer just a rigid bunk and a shared iron table. The Chiari had collectively, and without asking my permission, built a fortress of scrap metal, stacked ammunition crates, and scavenged armor plating around my workspace. They called it blast shielding. I called it a cage, but it kept the wind out, and more importantly, it established a physical boundary, my turf. I sat on my stool one evening, a magnifying loop wedged into my eye, meticulously rethreading the microscopic focal wires of a sniper optic. My hands were stained, a permanent bruised purple from the synthetic grease the Chiari used on their heavy kinetics. I had calluses on top of my calluses. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours straight since I arrived, but a strange, terrifying calm had settled into my bones. You are squinting again. Your optical organs are failing. I didn't look up. Roxy was leaning against the entrance to my fortress, spending most of her downtime here now. She'd appointed herself my unofficial handler, a role she took with lethal seriousness. Twice in the last 10 days, I'd seen her physically shoulder other Chiari out of the way when they tried to bypass the repair queue. My eyes are fine, I muttered, snipping a frayed copper lead with my tweezers. The lighting in this bunker was designed for giants with night vision. I'm working in the dark, Roxy grunted. A second later, a heavy portable floodlight slammed onto the table, blinding me with a harsh white beam. I blinked furiously, shoving the loop up onto my forehead. Better? She asked. The translator delivered the word flatly, but the slight tilt of her head betrayed a smug satisfaction. Yeah, thanks. I set the optic down and picked up a rag, wiping the grease from my knuckles. She was out of her heavy armor, wearing only the dark gray combat fatigues that clung to her massive corded muscles, the jagged scar on her jaw catching the harsh light. She reached into a thigh pouch and tossed a sealed foil packet onto the table. It landed with a heavy, dense thud. Eat, Roxy commanded. I picked it up. A standard Chiari field ration, high-density protein, heavily spiced to mask the taste of whatever cloned meat they mashed into it. It tasted like ash and chili powder, but it had twice the caloric value of my human rations. I have my own supply, I protested weakly. Your supply is dust and sugar, Roxy replied, crossing her arms, stepping further into my enclave and ducking to avoid a hanging power cable. You have lost mass, 3 kilograms since your arrival. Your combat harness hangs loose. A heavy gust of wind on the staging ground will snap your spine. I weigh 170 pounds, Roxy. I'm not gonna blow away. You are frail, she insisted, tapping a thick, clawed finger against my shoulder. The contact was casual, but the force behind it nearly tipped me off the stool. And you are mine to protect. Eat the protein. I didn't argue. Arguing with a 7-foot-tall apex predator about my dietary habits was a losing battle. I tore the foil open with my teeth and forced a mouthful down. It burned all the way to my stomach. A heavy silence settled between us, broken only by the distant, muffled thud of artillery landing miles outside the wire. Roxy watched me eat, her amber eyes intense, analyzing my every movement. On my homeworld, she said suddenly, her voice dropping to a low, rumbling hum, males do not bleed. They do not hold weapons. They are kept in the deep stone cities far from the sky. They are soft. They sing. They create art. I chewed the dry protein paste, washing it down with a swig from my canteen. Sounds boring, Roxy frowned, a complex shifting of the dermal plates around her brow. It is safe. Safety is a privilege our blood cadres bleed to provide. Yet you are here, a male in the mud, fixing machines of death. Does your species not value you? I leaned back against the concrete wall and thought about the drafting boards back on Earth, the desperate propaganda posters plastered across every transit station, the grinding reality of a war of attrition against an enemy that took no prisoners. My species doesn't have the luxury of keeping men behind walls, I said quietly. Humans aren't as strong as Chiari. We aren't as fast. We don't have natural armor. If we want to survive in this galaxy, everyone fights. Men, women, doesn't matter. You hold a gun, or you fix the gun, or you die. Roxy stepped closer. She reached out, her massive 4-fingered hand gently tracing the edge of my grease-stained cheek. A touch surprisingly delicate, a stark contrast to the violence I'd watched her deal out with the same hand. You do not hold a gun, she murmured, but you are not soft. The bunker's proximity klaxon screamed before I could process the weight of that statement. Not the oscillating wail of indirect fire, the frantic, high-pitched shriek of a perimeter breach. The red tactical lights flickered, died, and flared back to life. The ground shook so violently my stool tipped over. Harper's voice detonated over the internal comms. All hands. Sector 7 compromised. Heavy armor on the wire. Move, move. Roxy's hand snapped away from my face. The quiet contemplation vanished instantly, replaced by cold, Hard murder. She snatched her heavy plasma caster off the rack. "Grab your tools, little mechanic," she snarled, racking the bolt. Our break is over. The rain had turned into a freezing deluge, cutting through the toxic yellow smoke blanketing FOB Delta. The trench line was a slaughterhouse. I scrambled on my hands and knees through the freezing mud, dragging my waterproof tool bag behind me. The noise was apocalyptic, the deafening roar of Chiari plasma fire drowning under a new, terrifying sound, the deep mechanical grinding of Ripper siege engines. They'd breached the outer berm. Quinn roared over the squad comms 20 yards ahead, firing her kinetic hammer in rapid, punishing bursts, the air distorting around the muzzle as localized gravity fields slammed into the advancing horde. I stayed low, sliding into a crater just behind Roxy's position. The mud here was warm, mixed with acidic blood and the smoking remnants of a barricade. I peeked over the rim. My stomach seized. It wasn't just a swarm of infantry this time. The Rippers had brought a Goliath. A massive, six-legged biomechanical nightmare, heavily plated with scavenged coalition tank armor, standing 20 feet high and crushing razor wire under its spiked treads. A heavy acid cannon was mounted to its back, spewing streams of violently corrosive green liquid down the defensive line. Wherever the acid hit, concrete hissed and melted into toxic slag. "Concentrate fire on the central mass!" Harper's voice echoed down the trench. She stood fully exposed on a blasted berm, emptying a heavy repeater rifle into the beast. The plasma bolt scored the Goliath's scavenged armor but failed to penetrate. Roxy stood, bracing her Mark V against the lip of the trench, and unleashed a sustained, blinding beam of superheated plasma. The beam struck the Goliath's front leg joint. The metal glowed cherry red, but the beast barely flinched. It turned its multi-eyed sensor cluster toward Roxy's position. "It's not piercing!" Roxy yelled over the din, dropping back into the trench just as a torrent of green acid washed over the spot she'd been standing. The concrete above us sizzled and popped, raining hot, toxic droplets onto our armor. "Their heat sinks are failing," Quinn shouted, sliding into the crater beside us, her kinetic hammer dead, safety vents blowing white steam into the freezing rain. "Our standard yield is useless against that plating." I stared at the Goliath lumbering forward, preparing to step directly over our trench line. If it got behind us, the entire FOB would be flanked and slaughtered. I looked at the heavy plasma casters in the hands of the 404th, built for sustained firefights, throttled by heavy magnetic regulators to keep the volatile plasma cores from going critical. A safety measure. "Give me your gun," I said, my voice cracking. Roxy snapped her head toward me. "What? Give me the damn gun, Roxy!" I screamed, panic and adrenaline overriding any sense of self-preservation. I lunged forward and grabbed the heavy casing of her Mark V. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then released her grip. I dropped the massive weapon into the mud and frantically unzipped my tool bag. No time for the magnetic driver. I grabbed a heavy pry bar and jammed it directly into the primary heat sink assembly housing. "Miller, what are you doing?" Harper barked over the local channel, having fallen back to our position. "I'm stripping the magnetic regulator," I said, planting my boot against the barrel and hauling back with a sickening crack of expensive alien metal. The side plate snapped off, exposing the glowing, pulsing plasma core. "Are you insane?" Quinn yelled, stepping back. "If you bypass the regulator, the containment field will collapse. It will detonate." "Not immediately," I yelled back, fingers flying over the delicate exposed wiring. I grabbed my wire cutters and snipped the thick red tether connecting the failsafe logic board to the firing pin. Without the regulator, the weapon draws directly from the core's maximum yield. It won't fire a burst. It'll fire the entire battery in one shot. A shaped charge, Roxy realized, amber eyes widening. A very, very unstable shaped charge, I corrected, pulling a roll of conductive tape from my belt, rapidly splicing the firing mechanism directly to the manual trigger, bypassing the internal computer entirely. The weapon began to whine, a high-pitched, teething frequency that meant the core was heavily destabilizing. Heat radiated off the gun, singing the hairs on my forearms through my fatigue sleeves. The blue glow turned harsh, angry violet. "It's going to melt the barrel in about 20 seconds. I shouted, hands shaking violently as I shoved the weapon back into Roxy's hands. "You get one shot. You have to hit it dead center in the main chassis, and you have to brace yourself. The recoil is going to be ungodly. Roxy didn't flinch. She took the vibrating, overloading weapon, looked at the violent purple light bleeding from the cracked chassis, then looked at me. "Get in the mud, Caleb," she ordered. I threw myself flat against the bottom of the crater, burying my face in my hands. Above me, Roxy stood tall as the Goliath loomed directly overhead, its massive mechanical legs raising to crush the trench. Through the roaring chaos, I heard her roar, a deep, primal battle cry that rattled the muddy walls. She pulled the trigger. The sound wasn't a boom. It was a concussive tear in reality. The shockwave hit me like a physical wall, driving the breath from my lungs and flattening me into the dirt. A blinding flash of violet light penetrated straight through my clenched eyelids, followed instantly by a wave of searing, blistering heat. Then an explosion so loud it rendered me completely deaf. Heavy chunks of burning metal rained down from the sky, thudding into the mud around us. I couldn't hear them land. I could only feel the vibrations. I lay there for what felt like hours, coughing on the thick smell of ozone and vaporized steel. Slowly, agonizingly, the ringing in my ears faded into a dull, throbbing whine. I rolled onto my back. The sky above our trench was clear. The Goliath was gone. In its place was a smoking, slagged crater 20 yards wide, the beast's upper torso entirely atomized, its heavy armored legs standing aimlessly in the muck like broken pillars. I looked over. Roxy was sitting in the mud, her back against the crater wall. The Mark V was a melted, bubbling lump of twisted metal fused to the dirt. Her right shoulder plate was cracked entirely in half from the recoil, and her arm hung limp at her side. She looked at the melted gun, then slowly turned her head to look at me. Her amber eyes were wide, the combat adrenaline giving way to raw shock. A slow, jagged grin spread across her face. "Little mechanic," she rasped, voice thick and breathless. "You build an excellent bomb." Ash fell like dirty snow across Sector 7, coating the slagged remains of the siege engine in a pale gray film. I pushed myself onto my knees. The mud beneath me was warm, baked by the thermal radiation of the overloaded plasma core. My ears were still ringing, a high, thin whine making my teeth ache. I looked over at Roxy again. She hadn't moved. "Hey," I rasped, my throat raw from smoke and screaming. "Let me see." I didn't wait for permission. I reached out and unlatched the shattered remnants of her right pauldron. The metal was still hot to the touch. Beneath the armor, her dark gray skin was heavily bruised, the shoulder joint clearly dislocated. Kiari physiology was incredibly dense, but physics always collected its toll. "Do not touch the joint," Roxy grunted, amber eyes snapping to mine, pain flaring in her expression before it was buried under layers of stubborn pride. "I will reset it myself. Just give me a moment to cycle my pain receptors." "Don't be an idiot," I said, sliding my arm under her good shoulder. "You're gonna pass out if you do it in the mud. Come on, up." I braced my boots against the crater floor and hauled upward, like trying to deadlift a small car. Roxy groaned, a deep rumbling vibration, and used her remaining leverage to push herself to her feet. She swayed, a 7-foot giant leaning heavily against a 170-pound human. I locked my knees to keep us both from collapsing back into the dirt. "I have you," I muttered, gritting my teeth. "I am crushing you, Caleb," she pointed out, though she didn't pull away. "I'll live." We climbed out of the crater together. The firefight had broken along the rest of the perimeter. With their Goliath destroyed, the remaining Ripper forces had fractured and retreated into the toxic fog. Sector 7 had held. Harper was waiting for us at the edge of the trench line, painted in alien blood, a heavy repeater rifle resting easily on her shoulder. She looked at Roxy's shattered arm, then down at the melted puddle of metal that used to be a Mark V plasma caster, and finally settled her eyes on me. "A manual core overload," Harper said, her voice devoid of its usual aggressive edge. It was clinical, thoughtful. You turned a standard infantry weapon into a tactical strike. You could have vaporized yourselves. "We were going to get crushed anyway," I replied, panting under Roxy's weight. "I just changed the math." Harper stepped forward, reaching out to take Roxy's weight from me. I instantly felt lighter, though my spine still throbbed in protest. She supported her second-in-command effortlessly. Get to the bunker, Miller, Harper ordered. Medical is setting up triage. I nodded and trudged behind them toward the reinforced concrete dome. The inside of the barracks was a mess of exhausted, bleeding warriors. Med droids hovered over bunks, sealing cuts, administering stimulants. My workbench, my makeshift fortress, had survived entirely untouched. I collapsed onto my stool, resting my head against the cold steel of the table, wanting nothing more than to close my eyes and forget the smell of burning chitin and vaporized metal. My combat harness buzzed, a sharp, annoying chirp cutting through the low groans of the wounded. I fumbled for my datapad, wiping a layer of grease off the screen. A direct comms link. I tapped accept. Miller! Jenkins's voice crackled through the tiny speaker, sounding bored. Same old Jenkins, utterly insulated from the slaughter just a few miles away. You alive over there? I'm breathing, Jenkins, I said, my voice hollow. What do you want? Good news. Command finally processed your appeal. Keys clacked in the background. The bureaucracy is a nightmare, but we got it sorted. They admitted the clerical error. You're being officially reassigned to the 404th Logistics and Auxiliary, Supply Depot 9, safe behind the secondary lines. A transport crawler is hitting Sector 7 in 20 minutes to pick you up. Pack your gear. I stared at the screen. Logistics. Safe lines. No artillery, no mud, no multi-limbed scavengers trying to rip my face off. It was everything I had begged for 3 weeks ago. A golden ticket out of hell. I looked up. Roxy was sitting on the bunk opposite my workbench, a med droid working on her shoulder, sedatives waved off, watching me. Harper stood beside her, arms crossed, listening. They'd both heard the comms link. Every Kiari within 20 feet had heard it. The barracks went completely silent. The ambient chatter, the hum of the droids, everything stopped. 80 pairs of glowing amber eyes slowly turned toward my corner of the room. Supply Depot 9, Roxy repeated softly, the translator struggling with the wet, guttural texture of her voice. Safe! I looked at the pile of broken gear on my desk. I looked at the blast shielding they'd built for me without asking. I looked at Roxy, who had literally thrown herself between me and an alien blade, and at Harper, who no longer looked at me like a fragile mistake. In logistics, I'd be another anonymous mechanic tightening bolts on shipping crates. I would be safe. I would be entirely replaceable. Here, I was the only thing standing between a Blood Cadre and empty weapons. I wasn't just a man in a cage anymore. I was their pulse. I keyed the microphone on the datapad. Cancel the transfer, Jenkins. A long pause on the other end. Say again, Miller. You've got a ticket out. The crawler is already en route. Tell the crawler to turn around, I said, my voice hardening. I sat up straight, ignoring the ache in my ribs. I'm not leaving Sector 7. My assignment stands, 404th, embedded support. You're crazy, Jenkins sighed. If you reject this, the system locks you in for the duration of the campaign. There are no more appeals. I don't need one. Miller out. I killed the connection and tossed the datapad onto the desk. The silence in the barracks held for another heartbeat. Then Roxy grinned, a terrifying, jagged expression that showed entirely too many sharp teeth. She slammed her good hand against the metal frame of her bunk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Harper uncrossed her arms. She didn't smile, but she gave me that same slow, deliberate nod. Good, Harper stated, turning back to the room. Squad 3, get your optics to the mechanic. We drop again in 6 hours, and I want those lenses pristine. The chaotic hum of the barracks instantly resumed. The Kiari going back to their gear, their voices a little louder, a little more energetic than before. I pulled my tool roll toward me and picked up my magnetic driver. I was exhausted, bruised, and officially trapped on the worst front of the Orion campaign for as long as the war lasted. But as Roxy walked over, ignoring the med droid, and dropped a fresh steaming ration packet onto my table, I knew I had made the right choice. Command had sent me to the 404th by mistake, believing they were dooming a fragile human mechanic to a slow death among monsters who'd never wanted him. What they actually did was hand 80 of the deadliest warriors in the sector a man who refused to run, and hand that man 80 reasons to stay. We fought together for the rest of the campaign. Every drop, every breach, every screaming siren in the dead of night. I was there, tool roll in hand, patching armor and weapons between waves of enemy fire, because a broken gun in Chiari hands was a dead Chiari, and I had decided, somewhere between a coolant valve and an overloaded plasma core, that I wasn't going to let that happen. Not on my watch. Roxy never let anyone else claim the top spot in my repair queue. Harper never again called me a liability. Not once. Not even when the Rippers threw everything they had left at Sector 7 in the campaign's final weeks. Quinn started bringing me her weapons before they broke, just so she'd have an excuse to sit at my bench and talk. Even Jenkins, months later, admitted over the comms that he'd never seen anyone reject a safe posting for a frontline Blood Cadre, and that half of administration had a betting pool going on how long I'd last. I lasted the whole campaign. They were enormous. They were violent. They were, by every human standard I'd grown up with, absolutely terrifying. But they were my monsters, and as long as I had a wrench in my hand and 80 women counting on me to keep their fangs sharp, I wasn't going anywhere. If you loved seeing human ingenuity clash with Chiari firepower, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more epic sci-fi HFY content. What would you have done in Caleb's shoes? Take the ticket to safety or stay with the Blood Cadre? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Stay safe out there in the galaxy.